It's hard to believe that it's the month of October already. Hey everybody, how you doing? David Burns here with you today. Going to be talking about October tips for beekeeping. I got 8 tips today of things you should be doing in the month of October. We're going to be going out in the field. Don't get caught up in October. Get caught up in the first part of fall. The first week or two of fall. This is what you should be doing to your bees. And the very first thing I want to talk about is mite control. Bees. There you go, good job. And I can look for the queen too. Got 300 bees. There we go. And we'll deal with that later. Let's put the hive back together for now. I've not treated them at all this year. A lot of bees in there, a lot of generations. Everybody take a guess. I got 300 bees. I'm gonna guess, I got my number picked out.
Has it been tested?
Never been tested before. No.
I'm going to say 14.
Ooh, you're close to me.
Wow. 12?
I was gonna say 12.
I say 12.
Yeah. You have to spin these for at least 1 minute. I see some in there. Let's take it to the sun, or can you see it in here, Pat? Ooh, I caught a worm. 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm only seeing 2. So number 1, we really need to be dealing with our mite control right now. How do we reduce our mites? And the big thing is you want to reduce mites. That's what we're headed for right now, is reduce. So that's going to be a treatment. And so one of the things I talk about a lot is you need to test, then you need to treat if it's needed, and then it'd be great if you could test again. This will let you know, did the treatment work? So it's going to be like, do I need to treat? Do I have 2 to 3 mites or more per 100 bees? If I have more than that, I need to treat. And once I treat, I need to come back and do a test a couple of weeks later to make sure that my treatment was effective. The thing about treating that I want to tell you about for fall, it really comes down to either a slow, like a slow kill, or more of a flash or fast kill. So you might already know where I'm going with this. So, you know, your slow kill, like you've seen me in my video recently, probably use some for rock sand. You know, those are like an extended release of oxalic acid. So that's going to be more of a slow kill. It's going to take 42 days to really be effective. Where something like Formic Pro, those strips are going to really kill mites really fast. So that comes into play when you're thinking about how to control mites in the fall, because if you're using a slow release, then you may not have time to get back in your hive before it turns too cold to get back in your hive. Where something like a Formic Pro, you could probably have the entire kill happen within 5 to 7 days. And a lot of times you don't have to worry about taking the pads back out again. You just leave them in there. And so you always have that option. So those are the things you need to look at when you're selecting the type of treatment that you're going to do. Maybe as oxalic vapor. You know, oxalic vapor is not going to kill below the cap. So using a vaporizer, you're going to kill the phoretic or the adult mites walking around, but you're not going to be able to kill the mites under the cap. So you're going to have to come back and do it again when those emerge. So you got to give yourself time to get your treatments in based on the time of the year. All right, the second thing we need to think about for October tips is feeding your bees. Now this is a really important one here for me, because what I like to do is I like to feed my bees 1 part water and 1 part sugar. That to me is going to stimulate bees of winter physiology. So I'm wanting to feed my bees 1-to-1 plus the additives that I like to add to feed to my bees to actually get them to have bees of winter physiology is what we call it. Now, the bees of winter physiology are the bees that live 4 to 8 months in the wintertime. So that's what I'm trying to do in the month of October is, and we're going to show you this in just a little bit, is if I can feed my bees and kind of stimulate them or simulate a spring nectar flow, and then I can get the bees to raise more brood in the fall. That's brood that's going to survive all the way through to winter. I'm going to put my feeder board on here. And here's my jars. This is the mixture that I make up. I just put some Honey Bee Healthy in my jars. I put some Amino Bee Booster. I put some Ultra Bee Pollen Protein Powder in there in my jars. And this is 1-to-1 sugar water. So 1-to-1 means 1 part sugar, 1 part water. I'm going to tighten this up as tight as I can get it. And then once you invert it, it drips for a minute and then it will stop dripping. You know, after maybe 30 seconds or something. So the bees will be consuming this. I gotta get the bees out of here. The robber bees are gonna be wanting all of this. So what we're gonna do is have it set up like this. Now we're gonna put our deep box here, like that. Yeah. And then I always like to put a big block on it. Wow, that's almost over my head. But I know some of you maybe don't want to do that, and you'd rather just, this is the more traditional approach, is 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. And this is more syrupy. This solution of 2-to-1 actually is for storage of honey. So in other words, the bees will take this 2-to-1 and they'll dry it down. Now with this, again, we're working with October, we're working in fall, so you got to make sure that your bees have enough time of where they're not clustered. So if the temperature drops below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, then the bees are clustered. So bees start clustering at 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees for those of you that are in Celsius. So when it reaches this temperature, it's going to be hard for them to dry this sugar or this syrup solution, dry it down because they're going to be clustered. They won't have the activity of fanning their wings and drying it down. So if you're going to feed 2-to-1, just make sure you have enough time left in your fall to get this solution of more syrupy solution dried down. Now, people traditionally have used 2-to-1 in order to get more stores of honey for the winter. In other words, you're getting your bees fed for winter. And so this is something that I don't do anymore because I feed my bees in the wintertime. There's a lot of ways you can feed your bees now in the wintertime. It's catching on, by the way. A lot of people buy our winter bee kinds. They feed their bees that way in the winter. Other people buy fondant. There's a lot of companies now that are selling bee fondant that you can put on top of your hive in the wintertime. So if you're going to feed your bees, I kind of like having both though. I like my bees to have some stored honey on their own. Maybe I'll leave a super on. But then I'm also giving them more sugar options with my winter bee kind or your fondant or something in case they do eat all the stored honey, which they can do, then they'll have insurance by some of the stuff we're giving them in the wintertime. But I'll talk more about winter feeding as we get closer to winter. But right now we're talking about how to feed your bees in the month of October. So these are the 2 options you have. You know, how do the bees respond differently to 1-to-1 versus 2-to-1? And I think I've explained that. 1-to-1 is more like the nectar that they bring in from flowers. So they are more prone to raise brood. 2-to-1 is more syrupy, so it prompts them to store it and dry it down faster as honey. And they'll turn it into what looks like honey, capped over honey. Now the next tip I want to give you is evaluating your queen. This is a big one for the month of October. This is our last chance in the fall to make sure that your queen is doing good. Queen evaluation. Oh yeah, she's a keeper. So we're gonna have to go into a hive, and it's a tougher time to, do your inspections because bees are robbing. There's a lot of bees that are, probably gonna be on your hive when you have it open, wanting to rob it from other colonies. But we need to do a queen evaluation. There's probably time to do something. And that means if you find that you have a failing queen or a spotty brood pattern or something like that, you can either use a queen from one of your resource hives that you have if you're that fortunate, or you may be fortunate enough to buy a queen, or you may want to combine, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But before we can do any of these things, you can't combine, you can't really move queens around until you start evaluating how is the queen doing in the hive that you're in looking at. So what you're going to be looking for, and again, I like to say this quite a bit, it's important to me, but it's the 3/4 inspection. So in this 3, we're looking for the 3 stages of brood: eggs, larvae, and pupae. And then the 4 would be your resources. So we're looking for honey, pollen, nectar, and bee bread. So that's your 3/4. But in this case, we definitely want to look at our brood. Now, in the month of October or your fall, this is what I'm looking for. This is what's going to help my bees survive winter. The frames that I have that are capped over, and that's going to be frames of pupae. The number of these, roughly, I want to see 4 to 6 of these in a hive. In other words, if I have 4 to 6 frames of capped over pupae in October, that means that when they emerge 21 days later, that's going to be, the end of October. So basically November, December, January, February, March, April, May, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 4 to 8 months of bees of winter physiology. That can take me in deep into, March, April, May of these bees that are capped over in the month of October. Now, to get that, that's why I said earlier, I feed them 1-to-1. I'm trying to get more bees to be raised in the month of October by feeding them to produce frames of pupae. But to do that, this all boils down to you having a very good laying queen, and that's what you're evaluating on tip number 3. Now, the 4th tip is one that is a big one that I get asked about too, and that is combining hives. How do I know when to combine a hive? How do I combine a hive? So that's the 4th tip. Combining hives is something that we think about in the month of October or in your fall, because sometimes our hives just aren't big enough to make it. Combining hives means that one hive may look pretty good, but the other hive just is too small, they're not going to make it through winter. How do you know that? Well, you base it on the earlier things, the earlier tips, right? Maybe you don't have 4 to 6 frames of brood in that weaker hive. Maybe you don't have a good laying queen in that weaker hive. Maybe you don't have good stores, the 3 and the 4. You don't have good storage of food. You don't have good brood in there. So the earlier tips will reveal whether or not you have a hive strong enough at this point to make it through winter. And if you don't, then it brings you to number 4. The tip is that you can combine them. I'm going to lay a piece of newspaper over the top of this colony like this. And then I'm just going to go over here. And then you just come over here and lift this one up. But first, I have to make a few slits over here in the newspaper like this, just to kind of get the bees kind of sensing that there's some bees under them. Put your foot down, grab this one, lift it off, set it on top of the newspaper on the other colony like this. Try to square it up as best you can. Now let me show you. I'm glad I got my little marker here, because even though I'll show you in the field in just a minute, I want to show you the concept of combining. So here's what we have when we combine hives. Typically, we'll have your 2 deep hive bodies, and you have your top cover, your bottom board down here. And whether you have supers or on right now, we'll just say you don't, and you've got 2 deeps. But over here, you may have the same situation, but what you have over here is a very weak colony. In other words, they're not really that strong. What I like to do in the weak colony, even though I may have, all the 10 frames in both boxes, I may find that I have to choose the best 10 frames out of 20 frames. So I will take one of these deeps off. Let's say I take the top one off and I've got it over here. I will select the 10 best frames, and by best I mean resources and brood. So I'm going to take 10 frames of the best resources and brood over here, these 10 frames, and I'm going to take the top cover off over here. I'm going to lay down a piece of paper right there on top of the top box, cut a couple of slits in it. I'm going to move this over here. So I'm going to lay that box right here with the 10 frames in it. And then what the bees are going to do in no time at all, you put your top cover back on, in no time at all, they're going to just chew up that newspaper. Within 24 hours, that newspaper is going to be gone. The newspaper, it allows the bees to get along with each other and so they don't fight. Now, the problem is you're left with 3 deeps, right? So what do you do now? Well, now we're going to do the same thing, and that's another tip coming up after this one. Let's combine it. Let's say tip number 5 is going to be consolidating frames. It's a good time to say this tip, because now, like here, we're consolidating, even though we're combining, but now we really have to consolidate. We don't want to go through winter with these 3 deep boxes. So in this case, I'm going to do the same thing. I got 30 frames that I have to turn into 20. So I'm going to take out the 10 least valuable frames for me. That could be a frame, partially filled frame of nectar, partially filled frame of honey. I'm going to try to get rid of the frames that aren't totally drawn out, whatever. I'm going to choose my best 20 frames because I don't need 3 deeps going into winter, because that's just too much boxes for me where I live for the bees to stay warm in that big box. So I'll eventually, when they get accustomed to all each other after a couple of days, I'm going to go in and consolidate down. So look, it's not easy. I know what you're thinking. Like, what if I have a frame of honey? What if all of them look good and I don't want to get rid of them? What if all of them have brood on them, right? I'm telling you, it's not easy combining. You're going to lose something in order to combine a hive if they're that good. But it's going to be easier the weaker this is, because the weaker they are, the less frames they'll have of good resources. But yeah, if you've got a really barely weak hive, and then you've consolidated it down to the best 10, and this one's a real strong one too, it is going to be hard. Use your best judgment. I'll give you one more bonus tip. In October, these are really full because it's October. But as time goes on, they're going to consume more of the resources. Some of the brood's going to emerge. If you have time to drop back in a month in good weather, then you can drop back and say, oh, that month made a big difference. Now there's a lot less resources than I once had. There's a lot less brood, and now I can really consolidate this down. So you might want to wait a couple of weeks after you do this and drop back in and consolidate them, or 3 weeks and consolidate if the weather holds out. That's why you need to combine as quick as you can in early fall, so you have time to review this and consolidate these frames down into 2 deeps, or single deep if you're a single deep beekeeper. The next tip, number 6, is it's possible where you live that by the time you get into your fall inspection, that it might be your last inspection. So let's talk about whenever your last inspection occurs, what we need to be looking for. So we're all going to have our last inspection at some point, right? We're going to be like, oh, this is the last time I'm getting into my hive. So let me bring up some pointers, some tips that you need to really be aware of on that last inspection. The first thing is you need to shore up all of your equipment. So take a look at your equipment and see if you need to make some improvements to it. So you might have a corner knocked off. You might have a box that needs replaced. You might have something that you need to use metal tape to tape up a big hole, a gap or something. But if you're an experienced beekeeper and you've had this hive working for you for quite a while, the wood just wears down. Our hive tools, as you can see here, our hive tool starts to wear out the corners and it leaves a big gap. Now this can cause robbing in the fall. So you want to go through. Now sometimes I've placed metal tape. As you see here, I'm putting metal tape on this corner that's bad. The metal tape is a temporary fix. It's not a permanent fix. And this is your last inspection. You're not going to open it up anymore. So it's not like the tape is going to be in the way on your next inspection when you remove it. But taping up for winter, these holes, these weak corners and all can help a ton. So take a look at your equipment. And speaking of equipment, here's some things that I want to reinforce. You got to take off your queen excluder as we get into winter. Now, some people don't realize why it's so important to take off the queen excluder. Mainly because if your queen is below the queen excluder and in the winter they move up into the honey super, then she's going to be trapped and can't go up with the cluster into that food. So based on where you live, you may be warm enough where your bees never cluster. That probably is not going to be an issue. But in cooler weather, cooler climates, you're going to have to take that queen excluder off. Speaking of taking stuff off, probably a good time to take off your small hive beetle traps. We see beetles, wonder how many we've trapped. Oh, it worked good.
Look how many.
Wow.
There's a lot.
Absolutely good trapping.
On this
Yeah.
side.
Now you can leave these on, and I've left them on all winter long, but they're not as effective in the winter because bees are clustering and they may cluster away from the trap. So you might take them off, get them cleaned up, ready for next spring. Another thing you may want to consider taking off is your green drone comb. Now the green drone comb, these are ways of trapping mites. This comb is usually a whole piece of plastic, it's green, and if you leave them on all winter, the worst part is they'll start raising drones early in late winter, early spring, before you get a chance to maybe pull it and freeze it. The way these works, you allow the queen to raise drones in it, mites go on the drone comb, and then you freeze it and kill your mites. But if it starts to be used really early in the late winter by the bees, you won't have a chance to freeze it, and then you'll be raising mites. So it's not a bad idea to take this off now that it's fall. But remember, if you take it off, you got to have a decent frame to put in its place. Hopefully one with resources, or take it out and then kind of move the one with no resources all the way against the wall away from the center of the hive. And the other thing that I want to mention is insulation. We're talking about equipment, so let's talk about our insulation. Big one for everybody to think about: should I insulate my hive for winter? The big thing about insulation, and I've said this quite often, you need to insulate the top of your hive. The walls, the sides of them, I think most people agree it's not as critical, although it probably does help at times, but definitely the top. Now, top insulation has really gained real popularity as of late. A lot of people are insulating the tops of their hives now, and you'll notice a lot of people now are insulating the top in such a way where they can feed from the top. And I'm glad to see that. I've been promoting this for decades, and it finally has taken on. A lot of people are using fondant at the top now. So you usually use a shim with some insulation and a hole, and then you put your fondant on top of that, and the bees can go up through your insulated top, inner cover or whatever, and they get into your fondant. Of course, we use the Winter Bee Kinds, and that has the insulation and the candy on it as well. I'm not trying to sell that. We don't need to sell anymore. We sell a ton of them. I'm just giving you options that a lot of people do use candy boards on top. Some people use the mountain camp method, where you put a big block of sugar or you pour sugar on top. And that might work for some people. I'm not a crazy fan of that, only because it's more granulated sugar, and it takes a lot more moisture from the hive to make that more edible to the bees. But it might work for you. Personally, it just has never worked well for me. But insulation on the top is going to make a big difference in getting your hives through the winter. So that might be something that you want to do now that this is your last inspection. You know, you've got to configure your hive, insulate the top the last time you can open it, get the box ready how you want it to look, and go through the winter. Another tip I want to give you is, let's talk about strapping. You might consider strapping your hive down if you live like where I live on the prairie. Oh my gosh, it's so windy in the wintertime. And you can find different ways to strap it. You know, strap it through maybe some cinder blocks that it's on, or your hive stand or something like that, some tie down straps. Also, along with strapping is putting some type of big block on the top of your hive, like a cinder block, because we hope that it's propolized good enough where the propolis is holding it down, locking it together, but it can be very windy, and some critters, like maybe a raccoon, have been known to actually pry open a top in the wintertime to get some food. So if you can put a block, something heavy, if you're not going to strap, that'll help hold your top cover down if you get a tremendous cold blast of Arctic wind that might strip that top off. Tip number 7 for the fall And this is a good one to talk about, is the entrance of the hive. A lot of people don't know really how to configure their hive entrance for winter. So the entrance, there's a lot of options for your entrance. Now, one of the options is you can leave your robber screen on all winter. The robber screens that we sell actually are designed that you can pin them in such a way that the bees can go in and out of the bottom once you're done with preventing robbing, and it's working as a mouse guard. So that's kind of cool. Well, that's the next part. Some people like to go through winter, as you can see here, with a mouse guard. And mouse guards are really important this time of the year. So as you can see here in my field, they're getting ready to harvest the beans around my property, and that's going to make all the mice run somewhere out of that field and find a home for winter. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to overwinter in a toasty beehive. So you want to have your mouse guards on before it gets too cold at night and before they start harvesting fields where they're running the field mice out of the fields. So mouse guards, a lot of options there. Sometimes you can use your entrance reducer to have a smaller slot. That's maybe enough to keep the mice out. And other times you might want to use a bona fide mouse guard like this one here, where you can actually keep mice from walking into your hive, but the bees can still go through the holes. So these are options too with a mouse guard. I have at times, and I still do, sometimes entirely block off my entrance. You block it because I use my winter bee kinds that have an upper entrance. Not everybody goes through winter with an upper entrance, but in my case, I can block my lower entrance off because my bees are going to be going in and out of the top. And that's just one way I can do it. I still may occasionally drop back, remove the entrance, and then clean out the dead bees out of the bottom. But my whole theory is bees don't like to walk down on top of their dead sisters to go in and out of the hive on warmer winter days, but they do like flying out of the top of the hive because they start moving up in the wintertime. So that's something, my way is not the only way. Everybody's way, what works for you is great. But that's just, I'm telling you some options here. That's one of the way I do it, as I can get by with totally blocking the bottom if I have a top entrance on that winter bee kind board up there. So this is a good time for those of you that do live in the north where you get more snow and you get more ice. So your entrance can be blocked with snow and ice. And this can be a problem to a degree that it can actually, if you got a solid bottom board and no upper entrance, and now the only opening to your hive is blocked with snow and ice, that can be a problem. Bees still need air. They need fresh air, believe it or not. They don't need stale, wet, moist air in the hive. And so you have to go out there, if that's your scenario, if you don't have an upper entrance, you don't have a screen bottom board, that's the only entrance right there, then you need to scrape off the snow, brush off the snow, pound off the ice, and allow them to have air coming in that. So watch it during snowstorms and ice storms that your entrance doesn't become blocked off. Now, oftentimes I've seen my bees, enough heat will melt away the snow, or they'll move it away, but just keep an eye on it in case they don't do that. Tip number 8, I want to talk about the screen bottom board or the solid bottom board. So which of these is better to overwinter with? The controversy here, do you leave an open screen bottom board below your hive all winter long, or is it better to run a screen bottom board? And there is, when I first started beekeeping, there was no such thing as a screen bottom board. And then when they first came out, I was like real reluctant to ever do it because I was so used to solid bottom boards. Then I did finally go to screen bottom boards for Mite Control. At that time, way back, we didn't have all the treatments that we have now for mites. So screen bottom boards helped mites way back then. And now it seems like there's a little bit more of the needle moving a little bit more towards solid bottom boards again. Some people claim that they have better mite control with solid bottom boards. And I'm not sure if that's the temperature of the hive or just the way the hive may work. But I think both of these, I've not noticed a real significant difference personally. But I've overwintered a lot of hives with a screen bottom board on very successfully because bees don't heat their hive the way we heat our homes. they only stay clustered together and keep each other warm. So as long as cold air isn't sweeping up through the screen and hitting the cluster, it's not going to make that much difference in my opinion. A solid bottom board does collect a lot more debris over the winter, so you got to scrape it, clean it out so the bees can go in and out on warmer days, I think. But there are a lot of my hives that I do run screen bottom boards, and here as of the last few years, what I've been doing, and I've showed videos, I slipped something in there that's almost the size of the screen, but a little bit smaller, so that I still have a little ventilation around the edges of the piece I slip in there. And so by slipping in and covering a portion, the middle section of your screen bottom board, it still allows some, I guess, a break between just the wide open air below you, but then it provides a little ventilation around the edges of what you slide in there to help with that. But this is not hard and fast. This is something you're going to have to decide which one you feel more comfortable with, which one you prefer. Maybe it's already decided on how your hive is set up and ready for winter. But I know the bottom boards that I use have the option to slide in and out a piece that's built into the bottom, a plastic corrugated like piece of plastic. And so oftentimes I will slide it all the way in and then back off just an inch or two just to help ventilate a little bit, but block off a lot of that. Wow, this has been good October tips, replacing bad boxes, stuff like that. So I want to refer you guys to a video of my personal story. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. I'll see you guys right over here.